Hi, this is the Love Your Life Show with Susie Pettit, Certified Life and Wellness Coach. Join Susie as she helps you with your wellness and mindset so you can live a life you love. Let's go, warriors!
Warriors, hello and welcome to another week with me, Susie Pettit, your Certified Life and Wellness Coach. I am so thrilled to be in your ear. I deeply value your time and I love bringing you information each and every week that empowers you to live a life that you love. The name of this show. You are so important to me, and I've been hearing from a lot of you for a while, ever since I started the show, that some of my episodes on relationships and how to deal with, well, however we label people in our lives, the title of this podcast episode is Narcissism, but whether they're emotionally toxic or emotional vampires or whatever we're going to call them, that some of my episodes giving you the tools and the information there have been so helpful for you. And I want to I'm thrilled to bring you another episode today that I think will be another top downloaded one. And this is on narcissism. And narcissism is a term that's thrown around a lot lately. Like if you just type narcissist into Google, so many searches come up like, am I a narcissist? How to deal with a narcissistic parent? How to divorce a narcissist? It's everywhere. Okay, it's everywhere. And boy, I should know. Okay, at different times in my life, I've been convinced that different people in my life were narcissists. From my ex-husband to my dad, I've done a bit of sideline diagnosing. Okay, and some of that is because narcissists are really hard to diagnose. The narcissist personality disorder, they say that 1 out of every 200 Americans, and more men than women, are actually NPD, like could be diagnosed with it. Yet to get them into a therapist office where they will put down their guard and shield is almost unheard of. And so I want to bring you this episode because they are around. And if you are not in a relationship with a traditional NPD, you probably you've been exposed to someone who has narcissistic traits. Okay. And the reason why I bring this to you is because being in a relationship or relating with someone with narcissism or narcissistic traits is an incredibly soul draining place to be. It is often referred to as crazy making. And that's why I wanted to make this week and next week's podcast episodes. I went through so many years of my life thinking I was the crazy one. I was the one who needed to change. I was the one doing something wrong. That I'm now in a place where I support many, many people in seeing that you are not crazy. It's not you. Okay. I say, actually, whenever anyone asks the question, am I the narcissist? That's 100% sign you are not. Okay. And yet I do want to address that question as I've addressed it myself. Okay? To be clear, as I said, there are lots of narcissists out there. 1 in 200 is the latest data. Okay. And add to that, if you had a narcissistic parent or caregiver, it is very likely that you moved into other narcissistic relationships in your life as that's the treatment you were used to. Okay, that's sort of what was expected for you. That said, there's a narcissistic personality disorder, and then there's emotional immaturity. When we are emotionally immature, we have narcissistic traits. Okay, we may blame others for how we feel. We may attribute different circumstances in our lives as someone else's fault. Which is why sometimes when I'm going over the narcissistic traits, you may think, oh, wait, that's me. Because all of us are still working on our emotional intelligence. Okay, it's like our cognitive intelligence. You don't get done with a certain book or class and think, there you go, I'm smart, I know it all. No more learning needed ever. I know everything there is to know. Science, math, you like bring it at me. No. Okay, the same is with emotional intelligence. We keep working with the thought model. And remembering, it's our thoughts that cause our feelings, not the circumstances of our lives. It's an ongoing learning process, and one which, if you weren't taught it growing up, which most of us were not, it may lead you to ask this question, am I a narcissist? Okay. So while I'm here to say, again, I will say it again, and I may even say it again, if you're listening to this podcast, you are not a narcissist. Okay. You may have some unskilled moments when you blame someone else for your emotional state, and that's okay. I do too. I have plenty of podcast episodes to help support you strengthen and learn about your emotional intelligence. So make sure you subscribe to the show. And if you're new here, the best place to start with that is the podcast roadmap, smbwell.com/roadmap, all one word, because you'll learn the foundations of emotional intelligence. I walk you through truly a roadmap on just the basic episodes to get you up to speed. And wherever you are in this journey, whether you've listened to all 222 episodes, or this is your first one, or you've listened to it doesn't matter. My podcast and my programs are for you. We are the result of our environment. Okay. They did not even know about emotional intelligence in the 80s, even the early 90s. Okay. So for you to beat yourself up in any way that you don't know this is absolutely ludicrous and not something I'm up for. All right. 2 pieces are necessary for change. Okay. 1 is learning about what you're experiencing so you can start to spot the dysfunction. Okay. You can start to spot like, oh, that is a narcissistic trait. And 2, surrounding yourselves with others who get it and can support you. Those are 2 very important things. Okay. You don't know what you don't know. If you're surrounded by people who blame you and make you feel like you're the problem, you will think that's normal. I know this because this was my life. This was my cycle. Okay. I speak of it as if we're like in a fishbowl. Okay. The fish don't know they're in the water until they're lifted out and they're put in a different bowl. I couldn't see it. Okay. I was used to thinking and accepting treatment in a certain way from my upbringing that when it showed up in my marriage, it felt completely normal. All right. And that's the first part, is recognizing it's not normal. You're swimming in murky waters, dear warrior. In this episode, I will go through some of the main narcissistic traits so you can start recognizing the murky water. Okay. The second part is what I'm talking about. Surround yourself with people who get you. And those are probably not the people in your inner circle right now if you're in a narcissistic relationship. I know this because when I started to vulnerably question, okay, or look at others and look for others to help me validate what I was experiencing, that it was not normal, okay, that was life-changing for me. And yet I remember initially trying to question what was happening in my marriage and at home, okay, with my parents or my mother-in-law for goodness sake, seriously. So think about it. If my ex was treating me in a certain way, it's because he saw it modeled somewhere. So when I'd say something to her and she would reinforce the message he was giving me, that I was the crazy one, that I'm the one that needs to shift, I went right back into my shell of, oh my gosh, Susie's wrong. I must do what other people are saying. It's a very harmful place to be. And the same thing happened when I would get up the guts and maybe share it with my parents. They would turn it back on me. And so I'd go back another year of shutting my inner warrior down and thinking I was wrong and I needed to be fixed. Okay. It actually wasn't until I started to teach a group fitness class and overheard other women speaking of their husbands and their homes. I would just hear them. They weren't talking to me, but I would just overhear them talking while I was leading the class. And I started to think, maybe this isn't so normal. I'd hear of things they said or did with their spouses or family and think, isn't it a bit strange that if I did that at home, it would be met with intense resistance, blame, and shame? Oh my. Okay. And that is why I'm so passionate about what I do and why I do what I do and why I wanted to make this podcast today. Okay. To help whomever is listening out there spot situations where you may feel crazy, like you're the one that needs to change. I certainly felt that way. And so learning some of the traits of narcissism was super helpful to validate my experience and to help me step out of the cycle of abuse. Because then if I was asking other people who they were like on the narcissist team, they're like, no, Susie, you're crazy. Okay. Often those of us in relationships with people on the narcissist spectrum now were raised with parents exhibiting similar traits. And so it seems normal to us, seems normal for us to take the blame for someone else's bad mood or disordered thinking or crappy life. Oh yeah, it's our fault. No, it's not. Okay. Because this was our upbringing, our self-confidence has taken a hit. Okay. We were brainwashed into thinking we were the problems. We were the ones that needed to be fixed. There's a book I want to get called Human Magnet Syndrome or Self-Love Deficit Disorder, or something like that. It's not here in Australia, but when I go back to America, I'm going to get it. I'll find it. And I'll put that link in the show notes. But it speaks to this pattern of how, those of us with this, they call it self-love deficit disorder, this lower confidence. Because we doubt ourselves, we draw these narcissistic people into our lives. We're like human magnets. And I know for sure that was my case. Okay. I have said before, and I will say again really quickly here, that I am not blaming my parents or the other narcissists or people in your life. Okay. We are who we're, like, humaning is hard. Okay. I truly believe people are doing the best they can. And in any of this narcissistic abuse, I actually have come to a place where I'm like, yeah, I get how they do these kind of things. Okay. But it is not about continuing and moving forward with it. And how we get out of it is we start to know which narcissistic traits to be on the lookout for. Okay, this by no means is an exhaustive list, warriors. People write entire books on narcissism. And there are actually many different kinds of narcissists. Okay, I want to give a general broad brush overview so that if you're one of my little fishies, you can start to notice the poison in your water you're swimming in. And then next week, I'll provide some of my most helpful tools for you to begin sort of practicing getting out of that water. Okay, let's dive in. Number one, narcissists don't apologize. Start to pay attention. Are they able to say, I'm sorry? Not I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, period. Listen carefully. Do they take ownership for their behavior? Okay, or does it sound something like, I'm sorry I yelled, but you were being so unreasonable. I'm sorry I checked your emails, but I can't trust you. I'm sorry I didn't call you, but you're too clingy. I'm sorry, but is not an apology. Okay, narcissists don't apologize, which leads right into trait number 2. They are not willing to take responsibility for their actions or their behaviors. Listen to them. Who do they blame? Do they blame the people at work, their friends, you? Okay, do they take responsibility for their actions or life circumstances? Or do they say things like, the people at work are so ridiculous. If only they did X, then I'd be able to. Or do they flip it on you and blame and accuse you and say things like, if you only weren't so fill in the blank, then I wouldn't have to fill in the blank. Like, if you weren't so wishy-washy, then I wouldn't have to make all the decisions. Or if you weren't so emotional, then I wouldn't have to yell. If you weren't so difficult to be around, then I wouldn't be so sad. This is where our own self-confidence and self-love deficit does not help us. As when they say things like this, it's a familiar dance for us. So we take it on. I know I did. I'd be like, oh, okay. Yeah, I'll try not to be so emotional. I'll try not to be so difficult. Okay, like we feel like we did something wrong. Oh, right. If only I had remembered, then he would have had an easier day. No. I am so glad you're listening, and that's not accurate. Okay, which leads to another narcissistic trait, which is that they are well schooled at the concept of secondary fighting or distraction fighting, I call it. Okay, and maybe it's just, instead of fighting, it's discussion. I know my ex said he never raised his voice. Until the end he did, but he would discuss. Let's have a discussion, Susie. Okay. And he was a master at what I call distraction fighting. Okay, it used to make me feel so crazy. I'd bring up one thing. Okay, like I'd say, I was uncomfortable with the way you spoke to my mom last night. And he'd take it and run in a completely different direction, create a secondary fight. You're uncomfortable with that? How about your mom serving potatoes when she knows I prefer rice? And then legit, we'd start discussing the potatoes instead of his behavior. And we'd just go down this rabbit hole until I was like, why are we even having this conversation? Okay. Or I remember a time when I said, I'm uncomfortable with how you spoke to our son earlier. And he said, me? Did you see how he didn't do his homework? And I lost sight of how he was speaking to our son. And I started talking about the homework and defending our son. And then he says, you're such a pushover. You should work on your parenting. Don't you want him to do his homework? And then I'm there, like my head spinning, like, yes, I want him to do his homework. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what just happened? That's crazy making. Okay. The point is, you bring up one thing and they divert it to something else. So much so that after you're done defending your mom or her potatoes or your son and his homework, you feel so tangled in your head that you're just like arms, like, what were we even talking about? Okay. Which leads to trait number 4, superiority. They know best. Their way is the right way. I'm not even going to dig into patriarchy and how more men are narcissistic than women. Though, when you look at this trait, I can see clearly how this trait comes from the programming that, it's bad for men to be vulnerable or to appear as weak. And so they often armor up and then truly believe they are the best. There's no room for error or vulnerability. There's no space for them to say, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Okay. Rather, it's all about, nope, I'm right. My way is right. I know best. You don't. And then we believe it because of that very same patriarchy. We've been taught to look for others for our worth and our rightness. They were like, oh, right, they must know. I don't know. It's this friggin' cycle, right? Notice this. Is the person you're thinking of able to say, oh, yeah, you're right, I'm wrong. Or, oh, I screwed that up. Are they able to just back down, or do they always think they know the best? Their way is the right way. Okay. Leading into the fifth trait I'll mention, which is the final trait I'll mention for today, and that's secrecy. And narcissists can be very secretive. They are very concerned with how other people see them or think of them. Their image is very important to the narcissist. And so they may say things like, don't tell your mom about this, or this is a personal issue. Don't talk to your friends about this. Okay, their power rests on us thinking they're right. Okay, of me not talking to those other women at the exercise class. Of us thinking our fishbowl is normal. Okay, I often heard things like, this is a home issue, or good spouses don't share this sort of stuff with their friends. Okay, or don't air our dirty laundry. Actually, this one time that I did confide in his mother and I said something and she was like, Susie, you're wrong and you need it. She told him, and then he came back, and that was one of our fights where he's like, I can't believe you told my mom. And so it is just very much the secrecy. There's, I've heard of couples in therapy where one partner will say, let's not bring this up in session. Okay. Like, you're going to therapy to figure these things out with a third party. So pay attention, dear warrior. We all do unskilled, emotionally immature things. Okay. As I said earlier, I do. And yet there's a big difference between learning about our emotional intelligence and narcissism or emotional abuse. Okay. Say I do lose my mind and I yell at my son about his homework. Okay, I will go back to my son and say, wow, I'm sorry for yelling yesterday. That is not how I want to parent. Okay. I am sorry. I wouldn't say, I'm sorry I yelled yesterday, but you were being so obstinate that I couldn't help myself. Don't talk to your friends or girlfriend about these kind of things. You wouldn't tell anyone outside this family that I yell, would you? Okay, this happens in all families. Good families don't share, or any variety of that sort of nonsense. Okay, so I hope you can see the difference. Anyhow, these are just 5 narcissistic traits I picked out. As I said, there are many more, but be on the lookout for these. Someone not apologizing, not willing to take responsibility for their action, using this technique of secondary fighting or distraction fighting. Okay, superiority, thinking their way is the best, or secrecy, really with this like, don't share outside. Let's not talk about this. Okay, there are many other narcissistic traits. I'll be posting about a lot of them this week in Instagram and talking about it in the membership. I am here to support you. The first step in breaking out of these relationships is noticing that they're not normal. They're not normal. The water's murky. The next step, I'll give specific tools to help you move out. And these tools are awesome, whether the person in your life is truly like far down that line on the narcissistic spectrum, or whether they're just emotionally mature and exhibiting some of these behaviors. Okay. In the meantime, your homework for this week is to sit back and observe. Usually I speak about being the observer of your own thoughts. This week, I'd like you to be the observer of others, the other people in your life. Do they apologize? Are they secretive? Do they take responsibility for their actions or what's happening in their life? Remember, your brain's inclination will probably be to question yourself, to think, ooh, I can see some of me in here. Okay, there's another time for that. You are not a narcissist. Narcissists don't self-reflect. They don't take responsibility for their actions. The very fact that you're self-reflecting and doubting and questioning yourself shows you're not the problem. Okay, sure, you might have some emotional immaturity to clean up. We all do. Join the club. Okay, this is about you not colluding with their version of reality. Remember, those of us who were raised in these sort of relationships have been trained to think we are the problem. And if it's not your parent or your primary caretaker, I mean, this is, we are all, we're all in the patriarchal system. Okay, so your job this week is to observe. First step, learn. Consider, like, get a PhD in narcissistic traits. Right? Listen to my past episodes. Read the books I have linked in the show notes at smbwell.com/222. Just start to learn. Notice. That's it for this week. And I do need to say before I sign off, if you are fearful of any sort of physical abuse, if there is abuse in this cycle, if you have been hit or held against your will, email me today, please, at susie@smbwell.com. It is confidential, and I will work to support you. I love you all, warriors. Let's go.
Thank you for listening to the Love Your Life show. If you want to hear more from Susie and support the show, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Also, leave a review and share this podcast with friends and family. Go get 'em, warriors.